Good afternoon or evening, and welcome back. This is Bio 115. I'm Dr. Beal. I think you've taken the exam, and I hope you did well. If not, good luck on the exam. And this is meiosis. Before you do this, watch mitosis. Make me a chart. Doesn't have to be a compare and contrast even. Just make me right now a list of the stages and what happens in mitosis. And then leave yourself a lot of room to the right or the left. And make sure that you have room to write what happens during meiosis so you can create me a really nice table comparing and contrasting them both. And let's get started. I had a cell cycle question for you. Ooh, look, mystery, no answer written. I wanted you to compare and contrast prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Which of the following occurs in both? Now here, binary fission is prokaryotes only. Metaphase is something that eukaryotes go through. Only eukaryotes do mitosis. So DNA replication C is our only answer. I've left some exam information here. If you've already taken it, don't worry about it. I want to do a brief introduction about heredity. We're heading now into the genetics lectures. Meiosis is the first genetics lecture that we're talking about. After this, we'll do Mendel, we'll do some chromosome stuff, we'll do DNA replication, transcription, translation. But we need to start with a general idea of how all this works. We start out in prokaryotes and in eukaryotes, both, with asexual reproduction. In eukaryotes, this means that they do mitosis as a way to reproduce. Here is a single-celled eukaryote. Let's make him malaria. We might as well. And when this prokaryote or this eukaryote wants to create offspring, when it's triggered to make offspring, it goes through a process, mitosis, where it creates identical clones. This is great advantage because our first guy, he was living the life. He's doing great. Everything's working out for him. So it's very likely his offspring will live in the same kind of environmental conditions. They'll also be living the life and doing great if they're exactly like their parents. Now, this is also a problem because if things change and maybe the conditions are not identical, these new daughter offspring will probably have some disadvantages. They may not be ideal to that situation. They may not have any way of dealing with the changing environment. There's also a problem here where mutations are going to accumulate. There's no mixing and matching. There's no sex here. And so as they're not mixing and matching, any mistake that happens in this one will be passed on to its identical clone offspring and passed on to their identical clone offspring. And those mutations can be bad and they can accumulate and get worse. We have many, many more of them. Sexual reproduction, we've got some same problems, we've got some benefits. Now, when I started taking this in college, I was sort of taught from the point of view that sexual reproduction is better because there's a lot more variety. You have two parents and they mix their genes together and they have offsprings. This one and this one are the offspring of these parents. These offspring are slightly different. Look, they're totally different than mom. They look a lot more like dad. When that happens, that means that maybe if the environment changes, these frogs might be better suited to the environment. They might have the genes that they need to survive in a changing world. The variation can be an advantage from generation to generation. But there's also a problem here because you can't do it alone. You know how frogs breed? Most of them are gone now in the northern hemisphere, at least around here. But a male frog gets up and he climbs out of the pond and he sits on the edge of the pond and he sings. Brah, 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 brah. And if he is sexy and he's very attractive to the female frogs will come and accept him. But the problem is he's sitting on the side screaming and he thinks he's screaming, I'm a sexy frog. And it's really attractive. But he's also screaming, I'm a bag of meat. I'm a bag of meat. And every predator in the region now knows where he is. It's dangerous. It's hard to find someone. There's no guarantee that a female frog will show up. There's no guarantee that a heron or some predator is not going to show up. There's a high level of risk in sexual reproduction, finding a partner, having offspring that might be different than you. But the reward of having having offspring that can adapt, maybe, or a little bit better adapted to the various environments, that's worth all the trouble of finding a partner and risking your life to have offspring. You guys are a little bit luckier. It's a little bit safer for people. Mostly. I want to look at our chromosomes as well. This is called a karyotype, this picture down here. And this is a picture of chromosomes during mitosis in a human. These chromosomes are already condensed. You can see that they're in sisters, so that there are two. And here there are a pair of sisters on this side and a pair of sisters on this side. There are two chromosomes, each made up of two sisters. And I will zoom in on this. This is an animal normal condition. Animals, most of their cells are diploid, meaning you have two pairs or two sets of information, 2 times the number that is a set, that n number. For us, that's 46 chromosomes. We have 23 pairs, and we call them homologs or homologous pairs. Homo means the same. Homologous means they are basically the same information. This picture of a karyotype down here is showing 23, if you count, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes, and they've been lined up in their homologous pairs. You got one set, one of each homolog from your mom, and one of each set from your dad. 22 of those pairs are called autosomes. Auto is self. Some is little bodies. You have 22 pairs of autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes. Assuming, and we'll talk about variations in sex chromosomes in the human chromosome lecture. In fact, I'm going to skip all the variation for the first few lectures, and we're going to toss it in. That lecture is awesome, but it's all the ways that things can vary in here. But here, the average human has 2 sex chromosomes. You either have 2 X's or an X and a Y. Tiny, and I will zoom in on this later in a later lecture. This individual has an X and a Y. The Y contains the gene for testes. This individual has the genes to generate testes and a higher level of testosterone. Gametes are what you create as you reach sexual maturity. They're the cells that you create that you use to pass your genes on to the next generation. You either create sperm or eggs. Together, those are called gametes. They are cells that have one set of your chromosomes. They are haploid cells. And you're going to mix that through fertilization with somebody else's set and create a diploid organism that's a little bit like you and a little bit like them and a little bit different than both of you. In your gametes, you only pass on one sex chromosome. So this individual would pass on either an X or a Y, not both. And one of each of these homologs, one of each homologous pair, but a full set. So they will pass on a 1, a 2, a 3, and so on, all the way to one of the 22 chromosome. This is an idea that is surprisingly simple and yet surprisingly confusing as you come back and think about it. So we're going to keep talking about ploidy throughout the rest of the semester and next semester to try to get you comfortable with the idea of what it means to have a set or 2 sets or 4 sets of chromosomes. I want to go on to human life cycles. This intro video is a little bit thick because it's all the background for meiosis. I think it'll help you to have it all in one place. When I talk about a life cycle, and we'll do a lot of them in 116, we'll just give a general intro here. When I talk about a life cycle, I'm talking about the life of an organism from the moment it is conceived, so sperm and egg coming together, to the production of their own offspring. So it's not your whole life. You are presumably going to live much longer than the day you had your baby. You're going to live another 50, 60 years after your baby is born. But once you stop having babies, you're done with the life cycle. Having that baby is the end of your life cycle. You've created a new individual that is now going to go on and live their life cycle. There are 2 big parts to a life cycle, whether you're a human or a mouse or a plant. Fertilization is putting the gametes together, so two haploids merge together to become a diploid. And meiosis, which is not exactly, but kind of the opposite, we're going to take a diploid, a set of two sets of chromosomes, and divide it into two haploids, or four haploids. A life cycle is an alternation between fertilization and meiosis. When you're doing meiosis in humans, you are getting ready for sexual reproduction. Meiosis is the way that you make sperm or eggs. You make your haploid cell. The reason you do this is you want your offspring to have the same number of chromosomes that you do. We don't want them to double every generation. They have specific information in them that needs to be that level of information. Having extra proteins is not necessarily good. Having extra chromosomes is definitely not good. You want to make sure your offspring have the same chromosomes you do, the same number, and basically the same genes. This means that for every life cycle, this alternation of fertilization and meiosis translates into, within the life cycle, an alternation of haploid, for us, gametes, and diploid, adult or juvenile organisms. Depending on what kind of species you are, you do them at different rates. They happen at different times of the year or at different patterns. But all sexually reproducing eukaryotes go through an alternation of fertilization and meiosis. Fertilization is taking the two haploid cells and merging them together. They literally fuse their cytoplasm, they fuse their nuclei, and they form a single-celled diploid organism. We call that a zygote. A zygote is a fertilized egg. It is diploid. It is one cell. And in humans, and look, this is humans, in humans and other animals, this grows into a multicellular organism. You were once a fertilized egg. You were a zygote. And then you went through a lot of mitosis until you turned into an adult you. When you go through meiosis as a human, you only go through it in either your ovaries or in your testes. You take special cells in your gonads, your sexual structures, and those cells go through meiosis. Meiosis is a process of taking them from diploid to haploid. You produce haploid sperm or haploid eggs, your gametes. Now, I'm going to do a basic idea of meiosis today. When we get to 116, I'm going to answer, and we have 2 lectures about how we specifically make sperm and egg in humans. So I'm going to keep this real general, and I'm going to kind of just do it for eukaryotes in general as we start, which means I need to give you a general idea here. Plants are eukaryotes. They have mitochondria, they also have chloroplast, they have a nuclear envelope, and they also have this alternation of fertilization and meiosis. Remember, fertilization is you take the 2 haploid cells and they fuse together for the plant and they create a diploid organism that is a zygote, and it grows into a multicellular adult. Here it is. This is a fern. A tree is going to do the same thing. In plants, of course, it's a little bit different. This organism goes through meiosis. It creates haploid cells, not gametes in this case. It creates haploid spores. And I'm not making this red yet. You don't need to know this until 116, that these are called spores. These spores go off on their own, land in the soil, and they also grow into a multicellular organism. But because the cells that they grew, they mitosised from, are haploid, this is actually a haploid little tiny plant. In most of the plants you're familiar with, these are too tiny to see. But they are kind of complicated. They have a lot of cells. This thing, you can see this one with a naked eye, the fern haploid. This thing, when it grows up and it reaches adulthood, grows either sperm or an egg. It's haploid, so it only can make one or the other. So it will make a sperm or an egg, depending on what type of plant it is or where that location on the plant is. Two different individual plants put their sperm and egg together, and they go through fertilization. This is called an alternation of generations. In plants, there is a multicellular diploid and a multicellular haploid. I know you have words that go with this from bio in high school. We cover it in 116. Just the general idea here, not all of the special definitions for what all these plants are called. I want to compare it to fungus too, and actually many protists. Our malaria actually fits in here. Its life cycle is a little more complicated, but it does something similar to this. Fungus, like all of the fungus all over the place right now. There's a lot of puffball funguses in New Jersey, these big funguses that are like this big. They're like this big. They're edible, but please don't eat them unless you're sure. Don't trust me on that. All the cells in that giant multicellular fungus that you pick up, or the ones on your pizza, or the ones you're putting in your stir fry, all of those are haploid. The dominant stage, that means the one you see, and the one who exists for the most time of the life cycle, is haploid. Now they totally go through fertilization. Though two haploid fungi grow into each other, they merge their nuclei together, and they create a diploid zygote. That immediately goes through meiosis. This is immediately goes through, and it's supposed to be meiosis here. Meiosis is the process of making this diploid zygote into haploid cells. Those little haploid cells, they're spores, fly out of the fungus, and they land on the ground, and they grow up into an adult fungus. Animals, like humans, have a dominant diploid multicellular stage. Fungus, like fungus, has a dominant multicellular haploid stage. And plants get both. I should do the why not have both meme. I should have put that in here. Imagine it. So here's a question. This is as much detail as I'm really interested in asking you about these things. Who has a multicellular diploid stage? And I will come back to you in the next video. I'll see you when we'll actually get into meiosis itself. All right, bye-bye.